Hi, this is Chronicle Stories TV. Be sure to like, subscribe, and don't forget to comment where you're listening from. Dylan Harper wasn't just another content creator chasing views. He had a calm presence, a steady voice, and a deep love for unraveling dark history. His channel, Dead Trails, had gained a following for its slow, immersive explorations of abandoned places tied to infamous crimes. It was late October when he received an anonymous email, no greeting, no sender, just a line of text. There's a cabin past Spawn Ranch no one talks about. Manson used it to hide from the press. Still untouched. Still waiting. Attached was a blurry scan of a map, hand-drawn, weathered by time. It showed a dirt path diverging from the main road near where the infamous Spawn Ranch once stood. That was enough to pique Dylan's curiosity. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses, but he knew how much people loved a good Manson mystery. A week later, he was in California, his SUV rumbling along a forgotten trail beneath a wide, empty sky. No cell service. No signs of life. Just dusty winds and silence stretching for miles. He parked where the trail ended. Beyond that, a worn footpath cut through the brush, overgrown and forgotten. He slung his camera bag over his shoulder, tightened his boots, and started walking. The cabin didn't appear on any GPS. No records of it. No drone footage. Just whispers. After an hour of hiking, he found it. Half hidden behind a crooked grove of Joshua trees, the small structure looked ancient. Bleached wood. Boarded windows. A single door, barely hanging on its rusted hinges. He approached slowly. Every step stirred dust that hadn't moved in decades. Carved into the door, faint but deliberate, were the initials, CM. Dylan's fingers brushed over them. He swallowed hard. This wasn't just a ghost story. This was something left behind. Dylan stepped through the doorway, careful not to shift the balance of the fragile frame. The cabin smelled of old wood, dust, and something faintly sour, like dried sweat left behind long ago. His flashlight cut through the dimness, revealing a room nearly swallowed by time. Tattered blankets were bunched in a corner. A single metal-framed bed without a mattress leaned against the wall. Symbols, strange ones, were etched into the walls in what looked like soot or ash. Circles, XS, spirals. Some crude. Some intentional. In the center of the floor, someone had arranged rocks into a symbol Dylan didn't recognize. He pressed record on his shoulder-mounted camera. Okay, he spoke softly into the mic, interior of the alleged Manson hideout. This place hasn't been touched in decades. You can feel that. His voice, though calm, echoed with a strange hollowness, like the walls were listening. He walked to the far end of the room where a cracked mirror sat propped against the wall. His own face looked oddly warped in it, like it was being stretched subtly at the edges. He blinked, leaned closer. Then the sound. A faint knock. Not outside. From beneath the floor. He froze. Silence followed. Not even wind. Old building, he whispered to himself. Could be an animal. But he kept the camera on, moving slowly toward the center of the room. The knocking didn't return, but his skin crawled as if it had left something behind. Something watching. He set up a night vision camera on a tripod, facing the mirror. Then another one aimed at the doorway. Before stepping back outside, he glanced once more at the CM initials. They weren't as faint as before. They were darker now. Fresh. He didn't remember touching them. Dylan camped in his SUV that night, parked just beyond the edge of the trail. With no service and no distractions, he reviewed the day's footage, meticulously combing through the clips. At 13:47 on the main camera, during the walk around the mirror, there was a voice. Not his. It was low, almost a whisper. He said, "Don't come back." He played it again. The hair on his arms stood up. There had been no one else in that building. At first, he thought it was audio corruption. Maybe static interference. But the voice was too clean. Too deliberate. He checked all angles. None showed anyone else. Just him, alone, speaking calmly to the camera. He tried to rationalize it, an old radio signal caught in the mic. Wind distortion. But the words were clear. Sharp. That night, with his laptop screen dimmed and his back against the seat, Dylan began to feel something in the stillness of the desert night. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but watchful. Like the land was holding its breath. At 2:13 a.m., the interior lights of the SUV flickered on. He woke with a jolt. The rear door was open. He scrambled up, heart racing, flashlight in hand. He swept the desert in every direction. Nothing. No prints. No movement. The air was still. When he checked the video feed from the cabin's cameras, one of them had gone offline. The one aimed at the mirror. The last recorded frame. The mirror was no longer reflecting the room. Just a figure standing behind Dylan. Dylan stared at the final frame of the mirror camera. The figure behind him didn't match his shape. It was taller, leaner. Its arms hung stiffly at its sides. The face wasn't visible. Just an odd blurring, like the lens had refused to focus. But its presence was unmistakable. Someone, or something, had stood inches behind him, just outside his awareness. He paused the footage and ran it frame by frame. There it was again. For exactly 2 seconds. Then gone. His voice came softly into the mic on the recording. Feels like someone's here with me. He hadn't remembered saying that. Shaken but determined, Dylan returned to the cabin that morning. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the brush. He entered cautiously, flashlight in hand, though daylight poured through the cracks in the wood. Everything was just as he'd left it, except for the mirror. It was broken. A clean fracture ran down the center, as if something had struck it from within. The reflective surface peeled at the edges like burnt plastic. On the wall above it, someone had written in charcoal. He never left. Dylan backed away slowly, heart pounding. Someone's screwing with me, he whispered into the mic, or, this place is doing something. He checked the cameras. The batteries had been drained overnight, even the ones with backup power cells. Something didn't want to be recorded. Despite everything, Dylan refused to leave. He told himself it was just fear feeding itself. He'd stayed in worse places before, old asylums, ghost towns. But something about this cabin, this ground, felt personal. Like it knew him. He decided to stay another night. Before sunset, he returned to document every inch of the cabin by hand, taking stills, measuring symbols, comparing the wall carvings to known cult markings. Then he found the journal. Half buried beneath a floorboard near the corner of the room, it was wrapped in a plastic bag, dry and yellowed. The pages inside were filled with rambling handwriting. Some lucid. Some manic. Doodles of eyes, spirals, crude stick figures in circles. One entry stood out. Charlie says they're not dead. Just changed. The ones who gave him the light. We speak to them through the glass. Another page. I saw her again. Long black hair. Smiling even when her mouth doesn't move. She walks through the mirror and listens to me think. Dylan read on in silence, breath slowing, unease building like a slow tide. This wasn't just a cult hideout. This was a place of communication, something beyond death, beyond reason. A belief system no one had documented. A ritual kept secret even from the headlines. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the cabin. The pages of the journal flipped violently before landing open to a blank page. But something began appearing, slowly, as if being written by invisible ink. For words formed, shaky and wet. Don't break the mirror. Dylan sat outside the cabin as the sun dipped below the hills, the journal clutched tightly in his hands. He hadn't moved for nearly an hour. The warning scrawled across the last page repeated in his mind like a quiet chant. Don't break the mirror. But it was already broken. The camera batteries, the drained footage, the strange writing, all of it pointed to something he couldn't explain. He'd always prided himself on staying calm under pressure, being logical even in haunted places. But this felt different. This wasn't just a haunting, it was inviting him in. As night fell, Dylan turned on his infrared recorder and re-entered the cabin. The silence was overwhelming, as if the entire desert had fallen asleep around him. Every step he took creaked beneath his feet. Dust floated lazily in the air, thick and slow. The mirror, now cracked, still sat in its place. Its reflective surface was cloudy, but something shimmered beneath the crack. Like a pulse. He aimed his camera at it. In the viewfinder, something moved. Subtle. A shifting shape deep inside the glass. It looked like a woman's silhouette, thin, with long hair trailing across her shoulders. He looked up from the screen. No one was there. When he blinked, he heard a whisper, clear and female. "Charlie never left. Neither did we." He spun around, light scanning the corners. Empty. But then he saw it, just for a second. A figure, crouched in the far corner of the ceiling. Watching. Then it was gone. Dylan fled the cabin, breath shallow, heart hammering against his ribs. Back inside the SUV, he reviewed the footage again. Frame by frame, he caught it. The woman in the mirror. She wasn't a trick of the light. She had eyes, dark and wide, too large for her face. Her mouth was sewn shut, not with thread, but with the absence of a mouth at all. Just smooth skin, stretched where lips should have been. And behind her, reflected faintly in the glass, were others. Half-formed shapes. Men and women with vacant expressions, as if trapped in a different dimension of reflection. He rewound again. On the audio track, layered beneath his breathing, he caught something else. Children laughing. Soft, distant, out of place. Suddenly, his laptop screen glitched. The image of the cabin froze, then flickered. When it returned, the footage had changed. His camera angle was now different, from behind him. He hadn't set up a camera behind him. In the footage, he watched himself standing in front of the mirror. Then the woman stepped out from the reflection, placing a pale hand on his shoulder. His actual shoulder grew cold. He snapped the laptop shut, gasping. The air around him felt different now. Charged. Like something had crossed over. He wasn't alone anymore. Not in the SUV. Not anywhere. Dylan didn't sleep that night. He sat rigid in the back of the SUV, a knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, as the cold desert wind tapped at the windows like impatient fingers. The stars overhead looked unnatural, too still, too many. At dawn, he forced himself back toward the cabin. He didn't want to, but something inside pulled him. A compulsion. As though he'd left something unfinished. He stepped over the threshold and paused. There was a new door. It hadn't been there before. On the back wall, where only boards and rotting wood had once been, now stood a narrow black door with a rusted handle and no visible seams. Its frame was flush with the wall, as if it had grown there overnight. Dylan approached it slowly. "This wasn't here," he whispered into the recorder. "No one could have built this without tools. Without being seen." He reached out, hand trembling. The metal handle was cold. Unnaturally so, like touching dry ice. Then, from the other side, came a knock. 3 soft taps. Dylan staggered backward, chest rising and falling. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he searched the cabin again, now desperate to understand how things were changing around him. The journal still lay where he'd left it, but the pages were no longer blank. They'd filled themselves overnight with writing, different handwriting, scrawled and frantic. The others are waiting behind the door. They're in the reflections. In the silence. In the walls. And beneath that, one name was written over and over in black ink. Susan. 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 It wasn't the name itself that frightened Dylan. It was the way the letters trembled on the page, like they'd been written by a shaking hand, or in a hurry, as if the writer knew they were running out of time. He remembered the stories. The Manson family. Susan Atkins. One of the most infamous of them all. Convicted. Dead now, long buried. And yet, her name echoed in this place. Over and over. Like it wasn't done with her. He turned back toward the mirror. Despite its cracked surface, it still held an unnatural shine. The light didn't reflect properly. His own image shimmered, slightly delayed, like watching himself in a dream. Then he heard it. A soft voice beneath the floorboards. A woman's voice. Singing. Not in English. Humming, melodic, sweet, and deeply wrong. He knelt down, pressing his ear to the dusty wood. I see you. I see you. I see you. It grew louder, as if more than one voice was joining in, singing over one another like a twisted lullaby. Dylan stumbled back, hitting the wall. The mirror rattled against the surface. Then, the new door, creaked open by itself. Just a crack. From inside came only darkness. Deep, heavy, endless. But something was breathing in there. Slow, patient, waiting. Dylan didn't move for what felt like minutes. The crack in the new door was thin, no more than a sliver, but wide enough to see pitch-black space beyond it. He brought his flashlight up, hand trembling, and aimed the beam inside. Nothing. The light stopped abruptly at the threshold, swallowed as if the air on the other side was solid. No reflection. No dust. Just an oppressive void, humming with the energy of something ancient and cruel. Then he did what he knew he shouldn't. He leaned forward and looked through the keyhole. At first, it was just black. Then a flicker of movement, like wine through long hair. And an eye. It opened slowly. Pale, glassy, lidless. The iris wasn't round, it was a slit, vertical like a snake's, but milky and wrong. It stared directly at him from inches away, unblinking. He stumbled back, choking on breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Behind him, the mirror gave a low crack, another fracture stretching like a spiderweb across its surface. The floor beneath his feet groaned deeply, like something was shifting beneath the cabin. He ran out into the daylight, slamming the door behind him. The desert felt no safer now. Even the sky seemed off, gray despite the sun, like a storm that wouldn't form. In his pocket, the journal buzzed. He pulled it out, flipping to the last page. A single new line had written itself. You shouldn't have looked. Back inside the SUV, Dylan locked the doors, then scrolled through the footage he'd recorded just moments before. His camera had been running the whole time inside the cabin. He brought it up on his laptop and played it back. At first, it matched what he remembered. The creaking door. The black space. But then the footage continued, showing him, still standing at the door. Even after he'd run out. On screen, the figure of Dylan never moved. He stood completely still in front of the open door, staring into the void without flinching. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 5. Then something stepped out. The figure was blurry, as if the lens couldn't properly focus on it. Female. Long black hair. Pale skin. She moved like her limbs didn't bend properly, gliding instead of walking. She stepped up behind his image and leaned into his ear. The screen filled with static. Dylan slammed the laptop shut, pulse racing. He was breathing fast now, heart thudding in his ears. He wasn't just recording the past anymore. The camera was capturing a different version of events, a version that didn't align with reality. Or maybe it was a truer version. He looked at the cabin from the windshield. The door was open again. And someone was standing in it, watching him. Dylan stayed frozen behind the steering wheel, eyes locked on the doorway of the cabin. The figure didn't move. It wasn't quite a person, more like the shape of a person, too still to be alive, too detailed to be imagined. Silhouetted in the broken light, it stood at the edge of shadow, half inside the cabin, half out, like it was deciding whether or not to leave. He blinked, and it vanished. But the chill lingered. The SUV refused to start. No engine noise. No lights. The battery, new just last month, was completely dead. He turned the key again. Nothing. That was when he heard it, faint but clear. From the back seat. Dylan. His name, spoken softly, by a woman's voice he'd never heard before. He turned slowly. Nothing was there. He climbed out of the SUV, stumbling into the open air. No wind. No birds. The world was mute. The sound came again. This time from the cabin. Come back in, Dylan. You left the door open. His hands began to tremble, the edges of the journal poking from his pocket like it, too, wanted him to return. But it wasn't curiosity pulling him anymore. It was compulsion. Like something inside the cabin now knew his name, his fear, his thoughts. And it was hungry. He stepped cautiously back inside the cabin. The light outside seemed to dim the moment he crossed the threshold, as if he were descending into something deeper than the physical space. The new door was wide open now. But no darkness waited inside anymore. Instead, he saw the reflection of the room as it used to be, clean, undisturbed, furnished. The bed made. Walls intact. No carvings. No rot. As if time itself had reversed through that portal. And standing in the middle of that mirror room was Charles Manson. Young. Calm. Staring back at Dylan with an expression that was neither warm nor threatening. Just knowing. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just looked at Dylan as though waiting for him to understand something. Then, slowly, the mirror Manson smiled. Not wide. Just enough to let the chill creep up Dylan's spine. And behind him, reflected in the mirror world, figures began to emerge. Familiar faces. The women from the family. Susan. Leslie. Patricia. Their features soft, entranced, like marionettes waiting for a signal. In the real world, the cracked mirror began to vibrate. A single word formed in the frost across its surface. Join. Then the woman appeared again, closer than before. This time, she wasn't inside the mirror. She was standing right behind him. Dylan spun around. Nothing. The woman, who had been right behind him, was gone. Not vanished in the way a ghost might disappear, but more like she had never been there at all. The air where she stood was still cold, still dense, but empty. His breath came in shallow waves as he backed away from the mirror. Every footstep sounded too loud. His heartbeat felt out of sync with time. Then came the sensation again, like a hand brushing against the side of his face. Gentle. Curious. He stumbled back and felt something underfoot. A board that wasn't there before. Newly exposed. He knelt, brushing away the dust. Another compartment. This time, when he pried it open, he found a reel of film inside, an old 8mm home movie reel, WR. Side of the cabin, not abandoned, but in use. Rugs on the floor. Candles lit. Manson sitting cross-legged in the center, surrounded by followers. Their expressions were blank. Their eyes fixed not on him, but on the mirror. Even then, it was cracked. He turned the photo over. A date was scrawled in pencil. August 7, 1969. Just 2 days before the Tate murders. The last line on the back made his stomach turn. She told him it was time. Dylan hiked back to the SUV with the reel in his hands. There was no way it should have been preserved out there for over 50 years. Yet it was. The cloth had protected it. The film was dry, intact, almost waiting for someone to find it. He had no projector, but he'd packed a portable scanner for documenting old film strips. Inside the SUV, he fed the reel slowly through the device, watching the digital playback populate frame by frame. The footage began normally, grainy shots of the desert, the ranch, a few followers smiling at the camera. But then the scene shifted. It was inside the cabin. From the same angle as the photo. Manson in the center, unmoving. Around him, followers swayed, humming softly. Not words, just tones. And in the corner of the frame, the mirror began to shimmer. Dylan leaned in. Through the reflection, another figure stood watching. A woman, tall, veiled in shadow, standing behind the group. Her face was unreadable, but her hand was pressed against the glass, fingers long and thin. Then she stepped through. The footage stuttered. Jumped. The people in the cabin all dropped to their knees simultaneously, heads bowed to the floor. Manson raised his arms. He said just one thing. She showed me the ending. Then the film burned to white. Dylan sat back in stunned silence. Something had led him to that reel. And now, it had his attention. Dylan didn't remember falling asleep. But when he opened his eyes, the sun was low, casting orange light across the dashboard. The scanner and film were still on the seat beside him. Everything looked the same, until he realized he'd lost time. The clock read 6 hours 66 minutes a.m. That wasn't possible. He checked his phone. Still dead. The laptop, too. Then the whispers started again. This time, not from inside the cabin. They came from the windows of the SUV. As if something stood just beyond the glass, circling slowly. He held his breath. The voice returned. Same soft tone. Same disembodied grace. You watched what they weren't meant to keep. He closed his eyes and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Who are you? Silence. Then, after a pause. The one who showed him the door. The one who waits for you now. Dylan opened the door and stepped outside. The desert was glowing strangely, almost metallic in color, as if it was no longer reacting to the sky above. The cabin door stood wide open again. The mirror, he could see it from here, was reflecting something else entirely now. Not the cabin. It was showing the inside of his SUV. And he was no longer in it. Dylan staggered toward the cabin, breathing sharp and uneven. The world was warping around him. Sounds were slower. The air was thicker. His thoughts began to fold in on themselves. When he entered, the mirror showed no reflection at all. Only darkness. He stepped closer. 1 foot. Then another. Then he saw her again. The woman. Standing inside the mirror. She looked like someone drawn from memory, not real, but hauntingly familiar. Her long black dress, her blank expression, the way her hair floated unnaturally around her face, as if she were submerged in still water. She raised one hand slowly. And pointed. To the side wall. Dylan turned. The wall, once covered in carvings and soot, was now pristine. Except for one thing. A door. Not like the other one, a real one. Wooden. Closed. With a carved eye at its center. A slit pupil. Just like the eye he'd seen through the keyhole. He hesitated. Then the woman's voice echoed not in the room, but in his head. He opened it because I asked him to. You're here because he asked you to. Dylan reached for the handle, hands shaking. And as his skin touched the cold wood, the mirror shattered behind him with a deafening crack. Glass rained to the floor in slow motion. But the cabin didn't return to silence. From beneath the floorboards came voices. Dozens of them. Chanting something in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood. They were welcoming him. Dylan's fingers trembled on the cold wooden handle, but he forced himself to turn it. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the faint light from above. He took a deep breath and stepped down, the wood groaning beneath him with every footfall. The air grew colder, damper, carrying a faint metallic tang, like old blood. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a small chamber. Its walls were lined with mirrors, not one, but dozens, each cracked, warped, and covered in strange symbols scratched deep into the glass. In the center of the room sat a low altar, draped in tattered cloth stained with something dark. On it lay an ancient book, its pages yellowed and brittle, bound in leather that seemed almost alive. Dylan reached out to touch it, but a sudden gust of cold wind blew through the chamber, extinguishing the lone candle flickering on the altar. In the darkness, the whispering voices rose again, louder, insistent. Join us. Join us. Join us. Heart pounding, Dylan flipped on his flashlight, illuminating the book's cover. The title was written in a language he didn't recognize. But beneath it, scratched hastily, was a phrase he could read clearly. The Mirror's Covenant. As he opened the book, the pages revealed drawings and text that twisted and writhed like living shadows. Diagrams of portals, gateways between worlds. Incantations meant to bind souls. Rituals to blur the line between flesh and reflection. One page detailed a ceremony, the same ceremony Manson was rumored to have performed in the desert. A pact with something ancient, something hungry. Dylan's fingers traced the words, and the room seemed to pulse in response. The mirrors around him shimmered, showing fleeting images, faces of the family, distorted and silent, the woman from the mirror, her mouth sealed tight, a figure in the shadows reaching out. Suddenly, the chamber door slammed shut. The whispering rose to a deafening chorus. Dylan's flashlight flickered and went out. In the blackness, the voices spoke one last time, clear and commanding. Stay. Be ours. Become the mirror. The sudden silence that followed the voices was worse than the noise. Dylan's breath came out in shaky puffs as he groped for his flashlight. Nothing. The chamber was swallowed in pure darkness. No stars. No moonlight. Just cold, endless black. His hands brushed the cracked mirrors, their surfaces rough and cold. Each one seemed to reflect a different fragment of his life, memories he hadn't remembered until now, childhood fears, lost friends, whispered secrets. Then, one mirror glowed faintly. Inside, he saw the woman from the cabin, the one who had spoken to him. She smiled without moving her lips. The smile was both welcoming and horrifying. Join us, her eyes seemed to say. Dylan stepped back, heart pounding, but the mirrors began to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. The room was alive. Breathing. He felt himself pulled forward, drawn by an invisible force toward the altar and the ancient book. His fingers hovered over the fragile pages. A voice echoed in his mind, not his own. Read the words. Accept the covenant. Become part of the story. Become eternal. The whispers swelled, voices overlapping, chanting. Dylan closed his eyes. Could he resist? Could he fight whatever this was? His hand pressed down. As the first word left his lips, a language not his own, the mirror shattered in 1,000 fragments, releasing a blinding light that swallowed him whole. When the light faded, the chamber was empty. No sign of Dylan. Only the broken mirrors remained. And a single word scrawled across the altar in fresh, dark ink. Joined. Days passed without a word from Dylan. Back in town, his friends and followers grew worried. But at the cabin, something had changed. The cracked mirror in the main room pulsed softly with an unnatural light. And in it, a new figure appeared, one that hadn't been there before. Dylan. But not quite. His eyes were hollow, blackened at the edges. His mouth was sealed shut by an invisible force. And his movements were jerky, unnatural. He was trapped inside the mirror's world, a prisoner of the covenant he had accepted. Each night, visitors to the ranch, whether they knew it or not, caught glimpses of him, silently begging for release. But no one could hear. No one could see. Late one evening, a group of hikers stumbled near the old Spawn Ranch site. Drawn inexplicably to the cabin, they stepped inside despite the warnings etched on the door. Inside, the atmosphere thickened. Whispers echoed in their ears, urging them to look deeper. One of them pointed to the cracked mirror. For a fleeting moment, they saw a figure inside, a man with haunted eyes and a silent scream. The group fled in terror, but the image lingered in their minds. Because in the depths of the mirror, Dylan's voice whispered softly. Don't open the door. Days later, a paranormal investigator named Claire arrived at the cabin, drawn by rumors and the strange disappearances linked to the site. She carried a voice recorder, EMF meter, and an open mind. Inside, the air was thick and stale. Claire moved slowly, documenting everything, the symbols, the broken mirror, the ominous door. Her recorder picked up faint whispers that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. Don't break the mirror. Don't open the door. Don't stay. She paused by the altar, feeling a sudden chill. On the floor near the broken board, she found the tattered journal Dylan had left behind. Her breath caught as she read the final entry. They watch through the glass. They wait beneath the floor. And they never forget. That night, Claire set up her cameras and prepared to spend the night inside. As darkness fell, the cabin seemed to breathe with her, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the broken mirror shimmered, and a pale hand pressed from the other side. Claire gasped and backed away. Her EMF meter spiked violently, then fell silent. A voice whispered in her ear, soft, urgent. The door is open. The choice has been made. She glanced toward the wooden door on the far wall. It was closed. but for how long? Claire's hands trembled as she approached the wooden door, the one Dylan had opened before vanishing. Her flashlight's beam caught the carved eye in the center, eerily resembling the one Dylan had seen through the keyhole. With a steadying breath, she reached for the handle. The moment her fingers brushed the cold wood, the cabin seemed to exhale, an ancient, sorrowful sigh that reverberated through the walls. She turned the handle slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, descending staircase cloaked in shadows. Despite the warnings echoing in her mind, Claire stepped inside. The staircase led to a small underground chamber, lined with mirrors, each cracked and etched with unfamiliar symbols. In the dim light, Claire could see faint outlines reflected, ghostly figures caught between worlds. At the center lay an altar draped in stained cloth. On it, the ancient book Dylan had discovered rested open, pages fluttering as if moved by an unseen breath. A whisper floated through the air, chilling and close. "Join us, become part of the reflection." Claire swallowed hard, realizing the cabin was no longer just a place, it was a gateway. Claire's flashlight trembled in her grasp as she stepped into the chamber. The air was thick with dust and something heavier, an invisible weight pressing against her chest. The mirrors around her seemed to breathe, their cracked surfaces rippling like water. Faces flickered within them, silent, watching, waiting. She approached the altar, the ancient book open to the ritual page Dylan had described. The strange symbols seemed to shift and writhe, resisting comprehension. A soft chanting began, barely audible at first, then rising in a haunting crescendo. Claire's skin prickled as the voices merged into a single command. "Speak the words. Accept the covenant." Her breath caught. Fear warred with curiosity. But before she could move, the room darkened. Suddenly, the mirrors flashed light, blinding and sharp. Claire stumbled backward as ghostly hands reached out from the glass, grasping at her arms and shoulders. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Her reflection in the nearest mirror twisted, eyes blackening, mouth sealing shut. The chamber seemed to close in, the walls pulsing with dark energy. Claire fought the invisible grasp, but the mirror's pull was relentless, dragging her toward the altar, toward the ancient book, toward the covenant. Her voice broke the silence. "No. I won't join you." But the voices around her only laughed, low, cruel, endless. Claire's scream echoed through the chamber as the hands pulling at her tightened their grip. The mirror's fractured surfaces shimmered with an otherworldly light, casting jagged reflections that twisted her image into something unrecognizable. She clawed at the glass, desperate to break free. The ancient book on the altar seemed to pulse with dark life, its pages turning on their own, revealing more of the ritual she was meant to accept. Her heart thundered, but deep within her, a flicker of defiance sparked. She remembered Dylan's final words, the warning whispered through the broken glass. With trembling hands, she grabbed a shard from the shattered mirror at her feet and raised it toward the nearest mirror. The shard sliced through the air, striking the mirror's surface with a sharp crack. The chamber convulsed violently as the mirrors exploded into shards of light and darkness. Voices screamed, anguished and furious, as the bonds holding Claire loosened. The ghostly hands recoiled, vanishing into the shattered reflections. Breathing heavily, Claire stumbled back, clutching the shard tightly as the room returned to silence. The ancient book fell closed with a thud. The altar dimmed. Outside the cabin, the wind began to howl, carrying with it a chorus of whispers fading into the night. Claire knew the battle was far from over, but for now, she had broken the covenant. Claire stumbled up the stairs, shards of glass crunching beneath her boots. The cabin seemed quieter, but the heavy silence pressed in like a physical weight. She burst through the doorway into the cold desert air, gasping for breath as the first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon. Behind her, the cabin sat dark and still, its secrets momentarily sealed but far from gone. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, signal returning. A single message glowed on the screen. "You left the door open." Claire didn't stop driving until the cabin was far behind her, swallowed by the desert. But the shadows followed. At night, in her dreams, she saw the cracked mirror. She heard the whispering voices. And when she glanced into reflective surfaces, she caught glimpses of the woman in black. Smiling without moving her lips. The cabin had not released her. And it never would. Back in her apartment, Claire pored over books, old newspapers, and online forums. The Spawn Ranch's history was littered with rumors, cult rituals, disappearances, strange sightings, but nothing that fully explained the mirror's power. She found obscure references to an occult pact made decades ago, tied to Manson's family but older than any living witness. Her recorder crackled unexpectedly. A faint whisper emerged from the static. The mirror remembers. The mirror waits. Claire shivered. The voices weren't gone. They were just waiting for the next opening. That night, Claire woke to a tapping at her window. She pulled back the curtain. Nothing. But when she turned away, the reflection in the glass was wrong. Behind her, a shadow moved, too tall, too still, with eyes like slits. She spun around. Empty room. But the air was cold, thick with unseen breath. The mirror on her dresser shimmered faintly. And the woman was there. Watching. Days passed in a blur of restless nights and fragmented memories. Claire's world grew unstable. Shadows seemed to cling to her every movement, and the mirror's presence haunted every reflective surface. She started to hear whispers even when alone, soft, coaxing, pulling at the edges of her sanity. At work, she found herself staring blankly, lost in invisible conversations. Friends noticed her absence, but she couldn't explain the growing terror she felt. One night, as she sat in her apartment, the whispering voices morphed into a single clear phrase. "You're next." Claire awoke in a cold sweat. The bedroom was dark, save for the faint glow from her mirror. Her reflection was distorted, face blurred, eyes hollow, lips sealed tight. She tried to look away but couldn't. The woman from the mirror appeared behind her reflection, reaching out with long, pale fingers. Claire screamed, tearing herself away and smashing the mirror with a heavy book. The shards scattered across the floor, but the room didn't feel empty. The whisper came again, closer this time. "You cannot escape." The mirror was broken, but the nightmare was not over. Claire's apartment felt colder, darker, as if the shards of glass had released something hungry. Shadows gathered in corners, shifting just beyond her sight. Every reflective surface became a portal. She saw the woman's face lurking behind every window, every polished table, every screen. Claire's grip on reality slipped, torn between fear and disbelief. She found herself tracing the old ritual from Dylan's journal, desperate for a way out. But the words blurred before her eyes. One night, Claire stood before a cracked mirror fragment, reciting the ritual's words aloud. Her voice faltered but grew stronger. The glass pulsed, a low hum filling the room. The woman appeared again, this time stepping halfway through the shattered surface, eyes glowing with ancient hunger. Claire reached for the shard in her hand. The room froze. She had a choice. Accept the curse and join the reflection, or shatter the mirror and risk losing herself forever. Her breath caught. The whisper echoed. Choose. Claire stood motionless, shard trembling in her hand. The woman's eyes bore into hers with an unbearable intensity, ancient, patient, and hungry. Around her, the room twisted, shadows pooling and stretching like living things. Time slowed. Every breath felt heavy, weighted with a terrible inevitability. The voices whispered louder, a crescendo of echoes urging her to surrender. Yet somewhere deep inside, a flicker of defiance remained. Claire's fingers tightened around the shard. With a sudden cry, Claire brought the shard down onto the mirror. The glass exploded outward in a shower of sparkling shards, light and darkness swirling in a blinding storm. The woman's scream pierced the air, a sound that echoed from beyond time and space. Claire fell to her knees, breath ragged, heart pounding. When the light faded, the room was still. The mirror was gone. But the whisper lingered. This is not the end. The shards lay scattered across the floor, glinting faintly in the dim light. Claire's hands trembled as she rose, heart still pounding from the confrontation. For a moment, the world was quiet, so quiet it felt unnatural. She looked around her apartment, half expecting the shadows to recoil, the oppressive weight to lift. But the silence was heavy, pregnant with something unsaid. Her phone buzzed. A new message appeared on the screen. It never ends. Claire backed away from the phone, her eyes catching a glimmer from the broken frame of a picture on her desk. She froze. Inside the glass, faint shapes swirled, faces, shadows, flickering like candle flames. The woman's smile appeared again, fleeting but unmistakable. Claire realized with a sinking feeling that breaking the mirror had only fractured the curse, not destroyed it. Every reflective surface had become a doorway. Every reflection a prison. And the whisper in the shadows was clear. We are everywhere. Claire's nights became restless. No mirror was safe. No window untainted. Every reflection held that same haunting smile, those slit-pupiled eyes. At work, she caught herself staring into computer screens, half expecting the woman to step through. Her friends noticed her withdrawal, her haunted gaze. She tried to warn them, but her voice was drowned beneath the murmurs only she could hear. The curse was no longer confined to the ranch. It was everywhere. One evening, Claire returned home to find a package on her doorstep. No return address. Inside was a small cracked mirror and a note written in shaky handwriting. Break it, and it breaks you. Leave it, and it consumes you. She held the mirror up to the light. The woman's face appeared, closer than ever. Claire whispered, voice trembling. What do you want from me? No answer. Only the cold, dark reflection staring back. Claire's days blurred into restless nights filled with shadows and whispers. The cracked mirror she'd found on her doorstep never left her side, a constant reminder of the choice she hadn't made. She started hearing voices in empty rooms, footsteps echoing in hallways where no one walked. Her reflection began to move on its own, smiling when she didn't, blinking when she kept her eyes closed. One night, the woman appeared fully in the glass, her face inches from Claire's, whispering. Join us, Claire. Become the mirror. The relentless pressure on Claire's mind shattered her carefully constructed reality. She found herself drawn back to the ranch, to the cabin with the shattered mirror. Her hands shook as she pushed open the rotting door. Inside, the air was thick with silence. But the mirror shards on the floor glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. And from the shadows, the woman watched, waiting for Claire to accept what she had become. Claire's footsteps echoed hollowly through the cabin as she stepped inside once again. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly glow, and the stale air tasted of dust and despair. She moved toward the shattered mirror fragments strewn across the floor, each reflecting twisted versions of the room, and herself. The woman from the reflections stood silently in the shadows, her slit-pupiled eyes fixed on Claire, waiting. Why? Claire whispered, voice cracking. The woman smiled, a slow, chilling curl of her lips. Because you came back. Claire's heart pounded as the woman stepped forward, crossing the threshold between shadow and light. Around them, the mirrors began to crackle, shards lifting and swirling in the stale air. You can join us, the woman whispered. Become part of the reflection. Or break the mirror, and lose yourself forever. Claire's hands trembled, the shard of glass she still held gleaming cold. She knew what she had to do. The choice wasn't freedom. It was survival. Claire's grip tightened on the shard of glass, her knuckles white. The woman's eyes, dark and endless, bore into her soul. Around them, the shattered mirrors floated in the air, circling like vultures waiting to feast. Claire took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength. With a sharp cry, she smashed the shard against the nearest mirror. Light exploded in a blinding flash, shards raining down in slow motion. The woman screamed, a sound both human and otherworldly, before dissolving into shadows. The cabin was silent. The oppressive weight lifted. Claire collapsed to her knees, breathing hard, heart pounding. The shattered mirrors lay still, dull fragments on the floor. Outside, dawn broke over the desert, washing the world in pale light. But as Claire looked up, her reflection flickered, just for a moment, in the remaining glass on the broken window. And the whisper echoed softly in her mind. It's never over. The end.